My childhood home was a labyrinth of eerie memories where every creak of the wooden floorboards seemed to whisper secrets in my ear. The house was old, with walls that seemed to absorb the light and shadows that danced across the floors like living things. As a 6-year-old, I was fascinated by the antique dolls that lined the shelves, their porcelain skin and glassy eyes watching me with an unnerving intensity. But one doll in particular stood out, a gift from a distant aunt, with a smile that seemed to hide 1,000 secrets. Its face was pale and wan, with a subtle sheen that seemed almost wet. I remember the night it happened, when the darkness seemed to come alive and the shadows coalesced into twisted living things. I had fallen asleep on the living room sofa, clutching my favorite doll to my chest, when I was jolted awake by a faint shuffling sound. It was a low, menacing noise, like the rustling of dry leaves or the soft padding of footsteps. But it was coming from inside the house. I sat up, my heart racing, and that's when I saw it. A towering figure with horns twisted like a goat's, its presence seeming to fill the entire room. The air around it seemed to ripple and distort, as if reality itself was bending to accommodate its presence. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, a sickly green that seemed to sear itself into my retina. I tried to scream, but my voice was caught in my throat. All I could do was stare, frozen in terror, as the figure began to move closer, its eyes fixed on me with an unblinking gaze. My mother rushed into the room, her face pale with worry, and scooped me up in her arms. "It was just a bad dream, sweetheart," she whispered, but I knew what I saw, and I knew it was no dream. The figure seemed to be watching us, its presence lingering in the room like a cold, damp mist. I could feel its eyes on me even as my mother held me close, and I knew that I would never be able to shake the feeling of being watched. As I woke up, the sunlight streaming through the windows was like a cold, unforgiving glare, offering no comfort from the darkness that had invaded my dreams. I glanced toward the sofa where I had left the peculiar doll the night before, but it was gone. A chill crept up my spine as my gaze traveled to the kitchen, where I saw the doll sitting upright on the counter, its glass eyes gleaming with an otherworldly intensity. It was as if it knew something I didn't and was watching me with a sinister intent. I screamed, and my mother came running, her face etched with a mixture of concern and fear. "It's the doll! It moved!" I cried, pointing at it with a trembling finger. My mother hesitated for a moment, her face unreadable, before picking up the doll, her hands steady but her voice shaking. "You must have brought it here in your sleep," she said, though her tone didn't convince me or herself. Later that day, she threw the doll into the trash, but the unease lingered, like a festering wound that refused to heal. My mind replayed the events of the previous night over and over, like a twisted mantra, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for its moment to strike. Weeks passed, but the nightmares didn't. I often dreamt of the horned shadow, standing silently in the corner of my room, its unseen eyes watching me with an unblinking gaze. The house itself began to feel different, colder, darker, heavier. The mounted deer seemed to shift their gaze, and the portraits of long-dead ancestors seemed to sneer, their faces twisted in cruel grins. One evening, as my mother and I were watching TV, the lights flickered, and a faint guttural growl echoed through the house like the rumble of thunder on a stormy night. My mother stiffened, her face pale and drawn, and whispered, "Did you hear that?" Before I could answer, a loud thud came from the kitchen, like a door slamming shut. My mother grabbed a flashlight, and together we crept toward the source of the noise, our hearts pounding in our chests. The kitchen was empty, but the air felt wrong, thick, charged, as if something invisible was lurking, watching us with cold, calculating eyes. On the counter where the doll had once sat, a line of scratches marred the surface, forming a pattern that resembled a twisted smile, like the cruel grin of a malevolent entity. That night I awoke to the sound of footsteps, light and deliberate, like a sinister dance. They stopped right outside my door, and I held my breath, clutching my blanket tightly, as if it could protect me from the darkness that lurked beyond. The doorknob twisted slowly, and the door creaked open like a scream in the night. The horned shadow stood there, its form impossibly tall and its head nearly brushing the ceiling, its presence casting a dark and foreboding shadow on the wall. This time it moved, its bony feet making barely a sound as it stepped into the room. I screamed louder than I ever had, the sound torn from my throat like a ragged piece of fabric. My mother burst in, flipping on the light, and the shadow vanished, but not before it raised a hand, bony and clawed, and pointed at me, as if claiming me as its own. I felt a chill run down my spine, a cold and creeping dread that seemed to seep into my very bones. But something was left behind, a message scrawled on the wall in black, a single word that seemed to echo through my mind like a curse. Mine. Desperate for answers, my mother contacted a local historian who knew about our house, and what she discovered made our blood run cold. The house had once belonged to a reclusive artist known for painting grotesque and otherworldly figures, and rumor had it he dabbled in dark rituals, summoning forces that lurked beyond the veil of reality. One of his unfinished works depicted a horned, goat-headed figure, a creature of unspeakable horror, and the painting had disappeared after his mysterious death, leaving behind only whispers of a curse. My mother removed every portrait, every mounted head, and every doll from the house, hoping to banish the darkness that had taken hold. But I never forgot the shadow. Even now, I sometimes feel its presence, lurking just beyond the edge of the light, waiting for its moment to strike. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it sent a shiver down your spine. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more terrifying tales. What do you think the shadow was? Was it the cursed painting or something even darker? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, sometimes the scariest things are the ones we can't explain. Stay safe and sleep with the lights on.